If you have been scouring the internet looking for ways to make your memoir perfect, then you have come to the right place. Because I'm happy to tell you it will not be perfect, and that is the beauty of it. Today I want to talk about the 5 questions you can ask yourself to end the creative block of perfectionism. Stay tuned.
You've been writing your memoir, maybe even for years. You know your material, you know what it means. What's missing isn't the story, it's the structure. And that's why we started the Memoir Method Book Club. Every single month, Emily Thrash, a professional writer and editor, teaches you how to read like a writer by breaking down a published memoir and showing you what it's doing under the surface. Your first session is free. Head over to pageandpodium.com/book club to sign up.
Years ago, I worked with a client who is a perfect fit for Page and Podium. She was a high-achieving woman. She was ambitious in her career and her personal life. She was kind, and she wanted to change the world for the better. Ideal, everything I love in an aspiring memoir author. But she had one issue that really came up again and again until I really figured out where I stood on it. And that is perfection. Now, as we were working together, I was ghostwriting her memoir. I said, this is years and years ago. I was ghostwriting her memoir. And part of that process at Page and Podium still is that as you go through the chapters that we are writing for you, you meet with a managing editor to talk about the project. So during these talks, she and I were meeting to really just work through the content, work through the material, the voice, that kind of thing. But oftentimes she would tell me how excited she was because she could tell from how the process was going that we were going to have a perfect book. We were going to get this book perfect. And at the time, I felt really uncomfortable with the way she was saying that. Now, at the time, I was working with my current business coach, Lane Clark of Lane Clark Consulting, and I brought this question to her. And I just said, I really feel nervous because I don't know how we're going to get to the end of this process. She's never going to think it's perfect because what I knew then, what I know now, is that no piece of creative writing is ever perfect. Really, most things in this world are not perfect. And I said to Lane, so how do I make sure that the client knows that perfection is really, we're not going to hit it. We're not going to have a perfect book. And what Lane said to me really changed so much about how I think of the writing process. Because what she said was, why would you even want it to be perfect? And that is such a good question. When we are thinking about working through these experiences, sending out this message that is often the most meaningful piece of wisdom that we have learned in our life, why would our goal be to have it be perfect? Shouldn't our goal be that we want to connect with others, that we want to help them, that we want them to see themselves in us, that we want to make sure that we are authentic throughout, that we are truthful throughout, that the things we are sharing are true to our heart? Those all make perfect sense to me. And in fact, those are all things that I could confidently tell a ghostwriting or coaching client that we can absolutely nail. What we cannot do is hit perfectionism. And today I want to talk about 5 questions that you can ask yourself really to work through whether your drive for a perfect or even sometimes just excellent memoir is actually something that you are using either to self-sabotage, to hold up your progress, or just sort of unknowingly hitching your cart to, hoping that you're going to get through, even when actually you're putting a lot of roadblocks in front of yourself. So without further ado, let's get to our 5 questions that you can ask to uncover whether your drive for excellence is actually some version of perfectionism. Okay, the first question is, what does perfect mean? Now, as I was back then and now thinking about kind of how do I want to talk about perfectionism when it comes to the process of writing a memoir, how do we kind of think about that? One thing that I kept landing on was that there are things in writing that are a little bit more objective, right? There are kind of rules that we have that we could either follow them or not. And if we followed all of those rules, I guess we could say in that way, that book is perfect. Most of the things that readers care about do not fall into that camp, but we do know that there are some of these. But even as I started to think about these objective pieces of writing, the entire argument about those even being perfect started to fall apart. And I want to give you an example here. There are many of these. But let's take, for example, using the word but or the word and at the beginning of a sentence. Now, if you are similar in age to me, I'm in my 40s, you probably went through the educational system at a time when you were being told that you should never begin a sentence with a conjunction. So and or but would certainly qualify there, right? But I also bet you know that if you have been out in the world reading things, both marketing materials, emails, that kind of thing, and books published by major publishers, we don't really worry anymore whether and or but is at the beginning of the sentence. And in fact, did you just hear what I just did there? And in fact, when we speak, we pretty naturally break up our speech so that if we were transcribing it word for word, we are often beginning sentences with and or but in our speech. So one of the things that happens in writing is that as language evolves in the larger context of society, writing preferences also evolve right alongside that. So while in school, you may have learned not to ever start a sentence with and or but. In that case, a perfect paper would be a paper that never started a sentence with and or but. Now we know that doesn't really have anything to do with perfection or not, right? That is just a stylistic choice. And y'all, there are so many things in the writing world like this. Truly, so many grammatical errors, so many punctuation errors that used to be huge no-nos, and now they're just stylistic choices. So what does that mean for perfectionism? Well, what it means to me is that until we have defined some version of memoir that is actually right or wrong, we really can't define what a perfect memoir would even be. And in that case, why are we holding ourselves to that standard, right? Okay, so that is the first question. What do we even mean by perfectionism? The second question is going to take us kind of along those same lines, and that is, which version of you is going to judge the perfection of this writing? One of my favorite things actually, that I see over and over and over again with all of our memoir coaching clients, both in the women's group program and in our one-on-one coaching services, is that what people like, what people find good writing, what people feel really proud of in the beginning of a project is really different than the things they find to be really strong, the things they're really proud of when they get to the end. This makes perfect sense. Any craft or art form, the more you do it, the more confident you get. The more you do it, the more you get yourself actually on the page. The more you do it, the better you get. And what that means is the version of you that is starting a new project is going to have a really different vision of what a perfect memoir is than the version of you that is wrapping up that first draft. And guess what? The version of you that has gone through the entire editing and polishing and revising and publishing process, that version of you has a really different vision of perfection as well. So in this second question, I'm of course being cheeky. I'm always being cheeky with these questions, right? But in this second question, I really want you to dial in whose perfection you're going to aim for. Because I'll tell you what, the perfection that you see when you start a project, when you have not been through that process, typically people will realize at some point that they had a pretty unrealistic sense of how the process was going to go, how much kind of control they would have, but also how much flexibility they would need just to be human to get the process done at all. So, in the second question, really think about which version of yourself are you checking in with to see if it's going to be perfect. And if we can't even decide on a version of yourself that's going to be the judge for the perfectionism, let's just knock it out the window. We don't need this at all. Okay, the third question that you can use to get yourself through this question of perfectionism is, am I using perfectionism as procrastination? Oh, so many authors I have talked to that I have seen this exact thing. A couple of months ago, I had a client, a woman who had written a beautiful memoir. One of my favorite memoirs that I have ever seen come through the doors of Page and Podium. I just love this memoir, and I cannot wait till it's out and I can share it with you. but I loved it. Now, this client was going for a big traditional book contract. She wanted to get an agent. She wanted to do a speaking tour, the whole shebang. But what she had come to me for was a structural audit, a manuscript review. This is, of course, one of our specialties at Page and Podium. Since structure is our whole thing and we mostly only work with memoir, we're pretty specialized in these kind of structure review and analyses. But when we went through her manuscript, both Emily and I looked at it, and it was really, really strong. Of course, we could give her some things to tweak and change, but it was really good. Our main advice actually had to do with how she should angle and frame it as she was pitching to agents, because the manuscript itself was excellent. But wouldn't you know it, when I told her that we really felt she should be focusing much more on the pitching, on the angle, on getting it out to publication, because she'd done so much revising work already and it was such a strong manuscript, she really balked at that. She told me, in fact, it's not perfect, which is true. It's not perfect. Nothing is. But also, I started to kind of ask some questions. And as we chatted, one thing that became so clear to me was that her definition of perfect was actually just different from what she had. That when she thought about making the manuscript perfect, she felt like she needed to make radical changes to what she already had, even though she had already had two very high-level writing coaches look at this manuscript, work with her on the revisions, and Emily and I were both telling her it was really strong. In this case, I think you can see where I'm going. Sometimes with the very best of intentions, we will set ourselves up to just never believe that our work is good enough. And when we set ourselves up to believe that our work is never good enough, it gets us off the hook for some really uncomfortable things. In her case, that was pitching. As long as she stayed in this world of making the manuscript perfect, she never had to step out of that comfort zone and start sending it to agents. And so many authors I talk to are in that same boat. Now, this can happen at all different stages. This is not only in revision. I'll tell you another place I see it often is in folks who don't want to start the book until they feel certain that the idea is perfect. So this will often look like shopping the idea around to lots of different professional writers, as well as people you think of as in your target audience. It's going to look like overthinking. It's going to look like starting over every single time you sit down to do the project. And that kind of perfectionism is just procrastination in disguise. We all do this. But when you catch yourself aiming for perfection because there's some self-sabotaging part of you that doesn't want to move forward, when you catch yourself doing that, I promise you, if you stop and remind yourself that perfectionism is not even really a helpful thing, in this case, it's just slowing you down. That is so helpful to getting moving forward, reminding yourself that this is a process that you love and you want to move forward with. Okay, so that's the third question. Now, the fourth question that I want you to ask yourself is, why would perfect even be desirable? And one thing that I want to really point out here is that when we think about things that are perfect, we are often thinking about computer and technology automated type of things. Computers can make things quote unquote perfect in that anyone could look at a computer printout and say, yes, all the font is consistent, the spacing looks nice, the margins are nice and straight. That's perfection. But is that actually better than something that was made with heart, something that really communicates thoroughly with you, something that when you read it, you can tell that person was expressing something from deep in their soul? I'd rather have that than a straight line margin on a computer printout. So this is why I want you to ask yourself, why would perfect even be desirable? When we think about the messiness of human communication, isn't that the goal? Isn't the goal to really put ourselves on the page, to share our story, to inspire others? Those things really don't play well with perfect. They're not computer things. They're human things. I would argue it wouldn't even be better if it was perfect. But that is a question that I'd like you to ask yourself as you are moving through this process, to just make sure that you are dialed in on what your eventual goal is, and that it's not just the default goal of perfectionism. And fifth, the last question that I want you to ask yourself is, can memoir even be perfect? Here's a secret that I don't hear talked about often with perfectionism. Perfectionism is the very close relative of black and white thinking. And in fact, perfectionism is a type of black and white thinking. When we're aiming for perfection, there is a yes or no component. Either the thing is perfect or it is not. There is no gray area when we are choosing this word perfect, because perfect is one thing, it is objective, and everything else falls short of it. This is why perfectionism is so harmful, because it tricks us into thinking that all of our work has to be yes perfect or no imperfect. And in fact, when we think about memoir, memoir is not a black and white genre. If it were, I guarantee the memoir you were writing right now does not need to be written. If you could write a perfect memoir, we would really only need one of each topic, right? But the purpose of memoir is not to write a perfect memoir. The purpose of memoir is to contribute nuance to the conversation. The purpose of memoir is to hang out in the gray area. And when we are setting ourselves up to think that perfection is even an ideal, we are also setting ourselves up to ignore how important the gray area is. But folks, gray area is what makes a memoir a memoir. So the last question that I want you to ask is, can memoir even be perfect? I would contend no. And I suspect as you think about this answer for yourself, you will also land in a place where it's maybe not quite so desirable to be perfect. All right, as you are moving forward in this writing journey, I know it is so easy to get caught up in this idea that you want your memoir to be perfect. And I know there is a great deal of resistance to the idea that finished is better than perfect. I know that you don't want to get to the end of this process and realize that you tried so hard and still ended up with something that isn't very good. But I also can tell you that aiming for perfectionism is a way quicker way to get to this stinky memoir than actually just going forward with your authentic true self and with support. If you are ready for some support, some training, and some community around your memoir, I hope you'll visit pageandpodium.com/memoir-method to learn a little bit more about what we do in this program. We can't get you to perfection. In fact, we don't want to get you to perfection, but we can get you to an authentic connection with other humans so that you are telling your story in the way it deserves to be told with the message I know you want to get out there. In the meantime, I hope that you are moving forward with your project and feeling really good about it. Perfectionism never even needs to enter the calculus. Happy writing.
You know that feeling when a book just hits you? Not because the story is wild, but because it's shaped so intentionally that it almost makes you rethink your own story. You finish that last page and think, how did they do that? The structure, the honesty, the clarity. There's something under the surface that you just can't put your finger on. And the reason is, unless someone shows you how memoirs actually work, it's hard to translate that inspiration into your own writing. And that's exactly why we created the Memoir Method Monthly Book Club. If you want to join Emily Thrash every single month to dig into an exemplary memoir and figure out what's happening under the surface, head over to pageandpodium.com/book club. Your first month is free, and we can't wait to welcome you to the group.